Hi there. My name's Marla. I'm an SLP at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation in Burnaby in BC in Canada. And this video is going to be sort of a part 2 all about asking questions and using questions as a tool when we're working with students with Down syndrome. Now we know that students with Down syndrome have a strength in their visual processing relative to their ability to process things through their ears. And so when we talk about questions, we care a lot about how visual can we make that question. So the first thing I wanted to do today was to show you a little bit about sort of how we rank questions in terms of their difficulty level. Then I'll give you some examples about what those questions can look like, and then how we can adjust questions to make them easier or harder. For the part 1 on questions, you can see the link below. And this talks about how, in general, we want to use more comments than questions. But there is a time and a place for questions, so this video is about that. Let's take a little look. So first thing is, questions are not all rated equally. You see this little mountain. A lot of sort of early childhood intervention programs use this kind of mountain to illustrate how some questions are easier than others. Down here on the bottom, in the easiest section, are choices. So that's the do you want blue or gray choices. And then we move ahead to yes and no. Do you like blue? Yes or no, those kind of things. Then we move up a little bit harder, and this is the first of the WH questions, are those who questions. And those would be around familiar people and characters, that kind of thing. And then we move over to what questions, where questions, when, why, and how. Now this looks like the top of the mountain, but actually there's another mountain behind that one, which gets it into the more advanced language questions, which are the could, should, would you, would you ever go skydiving? Those kind of questions are even more advanced than these ones here. But for the purposes of today, we're going to stick with the fundamental WH questions and their precursors. So let's take a quick look here at what these early ones can look like. I'm going to scroll us down here. And let's take a look, because there's ways to make some of these easier and harder. So let's start here with choices, which you remember was the bottom of the mountain. The easiest way to present a choice question is with actual physical objects, like I did just here. Do you want blue or gray, right? And this plays the most to our students' visual processing strength. The examples of what is available to them are directly in front of them in a very concrete way. It's not a drawing, it's not a word, it's the actual thing. This moves up to be a little bit more complicated in this medium level when we use things like drawings. Do you want London Bridge, Mary Had a Little Lamb, or Old MacDonald? So presenting things on a visual strip or drawn out on a paper, that's a little bit harder than the actual concrete object, because the student needs to interpret that drawing to mean the actual object or actual song, that kind of thing. The hardest form of choice questions are the ones where we don't provide a visual at all. So if you're doing this, do you want, pizza or banana? And the student doesn't respond to you, and you're like, well, I thought they knew choice questions. It could be because you're not providing any visual support for your question, right? So that's choices in sort of 3 levels. How can we provide choice using the strengths of our student? And we can always move up and down within this, more visuals and less visuals, depending on the needs of our student and their needs, on any given day, which change. Moving over here, we have yes, no questions. Again, with the most concrete, holding up the thing, do you want this? Yes or no, being the easiest level for our students to understand. Moving into something more complicated, do you like this? And you might point to one, but there's multiple things there. And that's a picture, not an actual object. Providing sort of multiple options, those are what we would consider visual distractors. And that makes the question harder to answer because the student needs to tune out that extra information and focus in on just what you are talking about. And then again, when you don't give any visuals, this is a hard version of a yes/no question. Do you want to go swimming? Well, there's no picture of swimming. We're not at the pool, so it's kind of more abstract and therefore more difficult to understand. Let's move on to who questions. The easiest one is, who's this right here? And the person's actually there. And that's a good way to see if your student can understand fundamentally what who means. They can label that person right there. Moving ahead, who's that? Where you would have a picture of something familiar. And this is the Gruffalo, and you could point to that guy. But again, visual distraction, there's a lot more going on there, and it's not a concrete, real person. And then the most difficult version of like a who question is one that doesn't have visual support. Who brings us the mail? That kind of thing. Now, we do want our students to be able to learn all of these question words over time, right? So it's important that we can manipulate how hard the question words are by providing more and less visuals as needed so that the students can learn them. So let's think about how we can do that. And that would be over here. How do we adjust our sentences? So first thing to do is to simplify it. So if you are using a long question, what do you think about maybe later if we wanted to go swimming? You can really shorten that up into, do you want swimming, right? And make it into an easier question to understand auditorially, right? And I give another example here about homework because this kind of thing comes up a lot. There's a lot of sequences in school where you have to do, first put your name on, then finish it, then put it over here and put your pencil away. There's a lot happening in a row. If we present it all in sort of one big chunk, it's very difficult to understand. We can break it down, though, and make it simpler, especially if we're working on something kind of complicated like a where question, right? We've talked about using visual supports. So again, these depend on the age and stage of the student. These visuals could be objects. They could be pictures, either photos or drawings, or they could be written words if the student is at the point where they are reading. Any of those will help to make a question more concrete and easier to understand. Now, if you are trying out a question where, let's say it's a who question and it's not working, then you need to move up in the sort of little grid that I had going on over here. So let's check on that again. So if it's not working and you're working on who questions, who brings us the mail and you're just saying it, then recognize that you need to sort of move up and add more visuals. So how can we make this more concrete? Well, we could provide two pictures, one of a mailman and one of a doctor, something like that. Who brings us the mail? And the student can choose. So we're combining two different types of questions together. Or, if you can get the actual mailman, that's ideal. If you want to make it very, very concrete, or your mailman doll, that kind of thing. I hope that this helps explain sort of how we rank questions and how we start working on questions. I would recommend, if you want to work on questions, starting down here with something that your student is going to be successful with. Choices, again, remembering that the easiest form of choices are actual concrete things. And then working your way up. This often takes a matter of months to years. So this is not a process that's learned quickly for any person, including typically developing people. This takes a long time. So in particular for our students with Down syndrome, we need to be very explicit about it. And the way that we are explicit is by adding visuals. If you have questions about this, as per usual, you can contact us here at the DSRF. Thanks.